Well, the whole world's talking about what happened this week in Missouri, Chris, with this Judge Wimes, this commie Marxist judge who struck down Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act. And what is just absolutely delightful to me is to watch all the media in Missouri, but more importantly, all across the country, crowing as though somehow they scored or secured some kind of a major victory. Like, oh my gosh, the Dorr Brothers did not foresee a commie Marxist liberal judge striking down Missouri's SAPA law. For the few people that might not be aware of this yet, just as a quick recap, so Missouri has the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Our work group joined other forces to help make that all possible. The Missouri Firearms Coalition is Missouri's preeminent ass-beating gun rights organization and delivered this major victory back in 2021. And what it says is that Missouri cops will enforce Missouri gun laws when it comes to firearms, ammunition, and accessories, a.k.a. Joe Biden cannot use Missouri cops to enforce any federal gun control. None of it. None of it. And this is not an idea that we exclusively dreamed up. This comes from the Constitution. This comes from Supreme Court precedent. The idea of the states giving the middle finger, to the federal government is a long and storied history in the stories of American patriotism.
It ripped right out of the Federalist Papers originally.
Exactly. And so I think that for a lot of people who are perhaps newer to the SAPA fight, this is kind of a new concept, but this is not new. It's not new in America. And frankly, it's not new for us and what's happening right now today. I think what you're already seeing in the news clips in the last 48 hours is some of the NPR folks already beginning to freak out, like, oh my gosh, maybe we just played into the Dorr Brothers' hands, because this now is going to go way, way, way higher.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for them to sit there and think that we are somehow shut down by this leftist opinion of a left-wing activist judge, it's pretty funny. I would say that this is a recent development with this whole idea of anti-commandeering, because it's finally being applied to the issue of the Second Amendment. But the problem is our country has had to go all the way over the edge, as it were, towards gun control before the demand for this kind of legislation would be appropriate, would arise, would be supported by the grassroots. And that's exactly where we are right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. We had to have a tyrant wicked enough, evil enough, demented enough to have a need for this in the first place. And
obvious enough, one that's willing to stand there and say the foolish things that they are saying right now.
Right. That's a good point. So what's great, though, is that our founding fathers anticipated all of this. And they knew that anytime you have a massive country with, whether it's a king, whether it's a president, whether it's any other form of government, eventually there is the risk that person or that structure becomes tyrannical against its own citizens. And they knew this was a possibility. That's why they gave us the idea of the sovereign states, which of that state conglomeration, the federal government was born. It is not the other way around, for those who are watching, and for all the NPR pinkos who are watching right now. We don't care what you were taught in school, because what you were taught came from a bunch of fellow communists themselves who hate this country. They want you to believe that the states are birthed from the feds, and it's the exact opposite. And our founders knew this. And like you said, this was the most unfortunately, we had to get to a point where we have a federal government that's so out of control. There is now a need for the states to consider, what can we do? What can we do?
Yeah. So I'm sorry to break in there, but that is something that you do not hear from any public school today, that the states are the parents of federal government. And really important to this whole idea of anti-commandeering, which is the state saying the federal government can't tell us what to do, is the founding fathers were very deliberate in how they structured this. The federal government and state government, they are co-equal in power. Neither one can tell the other one what to do, and and vice versa, obviously. So co-equal power from the state to the federal government, that's the powerful basis, the foundation on which this is built. So it's time to exploit that.
Yeah. Well, what's funny to me Chris, we laughed. NPR got a Pulitzer Prize, which frankly, they owe that to you, and they owe that to me, and they owe that to Alex, and they owe that to Ben, and they owe it to the rest of the Dorr siblings who are involved with this. But they got a Pulitzer Prize from supposedly uncovering this big secret. They pulled back the curtain and they said that the Doors are using gun politics to advance a worldview and ideology, which is not just about guns. And we're just sitting there scratching our heads like, how the hell did it take them so long to figure this out? It's like, wow, you guys truly are Pulitzer Prize winning investigators. I've passed constitutional carry in four states, passed in your ground law in a couple states, 3 states now. You've passed constitutional carry in Ohio recently. Your work there, I think, put a lot of indirect pressure on Governor Holcomb in Indiana and made him get off his butt. I mean, we've passed gun bills for 15 years, but the reality is that the Second Amendment Preservation Act and the ramifications of SAPA law dwarf everything else when it comes to the ramifications, the freedom implications of SAPA, because when these red states begin to realize that they have the inherent authority as a sovereign state to tell Joe Biden or any future president to go pound sand, that is perhaps the most powerful accomplishment to date. And when those red states can say, no, we're not going to do this, it's going to be a revitalization of keeping red America keeping red America free. While federal tyranny exhausts itself and dies on the vine because they lack the money and the manpower to go and have their way with these states. For all the commie reporters watching, like, this is exactly where we have been heading for a very long time, and we knew exactly the ramifications of SAPA. And gosh, I could not be happier right now where we are with this fight in Missouri and the ramifications it has for the entire country.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about, like you were just talking about, we've passed gun bills in a lot of different states on Constitution and on constitutional carry and on stand your ground and enhanced versions of those things sometimes. I was telling a couple of gun owners I was talking with in the Ohio State House the other day, that's about what we can do to protect our right to carry and defend ourselves right now. Right. But when it comes to this idea of SAPA law, this is about making sure that our kids and our grandkids have a fighting chance to inherit even a modicum of what we got to inherit for a country, for states, and stuff going down the road. And, when we were explaining the power of SAPA to some legislators in the Ohio State House, for example, a couple of days ago, once the light bulb went off in their heads, and this is explicitly, this is the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to do right now with this SAPA issue on the issue of gun rights. We're trying to get these light bulbs to go off, because what happened with this one legislator was, so I understand. Okay, so we can do this on this issue of gun rights. Yep. But what does that mean for all of these other issues that we're experiencing right now with this federal overreach? Are you saying that this 10th Amendment doctrine, this anti-commandeering doctrine, can be used on all these other things? We as a state legislature can do that? And we're like, exactly. Bingo. Exactly. It's exactly what we Dorr Brothers are trying to do.
I just don't think anybody in the entire gun rights space in the country, I know that nobody in the gun rights space anywhere is using this in the way that we crafted this 2 years ago, trying to use it for. Yes, it's about gun rights, but it's about the 10th Amendment and the idea of red America staying free. And I've been pushing SAPA. There's a great clip here. Where is this? This is NPR wigging out. The Dorr Brothers are pushing this in Missouri, Iowa, Ohio, Georgia. I mean, I was in the State House in Georgia last week working with the public safety chairman. No, he's just retired now as the chairman. Now he's on the committee. But I explained to him, I was like, the ramifications of this put everything else you've accomplished, in terms of advancing gun rights in Georgia to shame. And I was like, you're 70, 75, whatever you are. I was like, no offense to you. You're not going to be around for forever. But as to your point, Chris, I said, this is what you do today to give your grandkids the freedom that you've enjoyed for the last 70, 75 years of your life. And to be totally honest, even people who are not very, interested in the idea of state sovereignty or understand the 10th Amendment perhaps at all, everybody who has any kind of morality intuitively understands the idea that our country is hanging on by a thread right now, and that the rights of our grandchildren for the first time are by no means certain, by no means secure, by no means guaranteed. And this is what we can do right now. And so, you're 100% right, because he asked me, well, can we use this on the pro-life issue?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, bro, they already are in Texas. It's already happening. Others have said, can we use this to defeat a future, masking mandate or future other restrictions and any type of restrictions from the federal? The answer is yes.
Because common core education standards, Medicaid expansion, all of these different things that are coming down, that are being crammed down the state's throats. A lot of these state legislators, I've been to these legislative conferences before back in my previous time as a legislative aide. A lot of these legislators have no idea of the tools and of the power that they have as members of a General Assembly, and that body unified together on this issue would be able to turn some of these states around that are headed in god-awful direction. I know so many gun owners look at states like California, Illinois, New York, Washington State, and Illinois, and they think, oh my gosh, everything that I see there is only 10 years away from here in my state. Well, you know what? The reason why those states get progressively worse and some of these states are turning from red to purple to blue is because these general assemblies are not fighting back with the tools that they have. That's why we're trying to get this stuff implemented, enshrined, and being used by these state legislatures right now. So.
It's almost like this was scripted.
Ding.
And so that's where we are today. Then right now, so this is Judge Brian Wimes. This is Judge Wimes from Kansas City. Judge Wimes was appointed. I have a clip here somewhere. Appointed by Barack Obama. The OG Marxist president, at least in my lifetime.
Yes.
And, we were both there. Chris, we were both there for oral arguments last July. The guy
was July 6th, I think it was.
J6, the other J6. An absolute out of control activist judge. He all but came across the bench at the state of Missouri's legal counsel, who was there to defend Missouri's SAPA law. And he made it abundantly clear that there was no way in heck he was going to uphold SAPA law. And we knew from that day that our chances were between 0 and 0% that it would survive. And we walked out of that court. I remember looking over at now Congressman Burleson, who was there with us, who was the Senate sponsor, and then Jared Taylor, who was the House sponsor. And I was like, boys, that's a victory. And they looked over and said, man, he's pretty rough. And I was like, nah, dude, he's going to strike it down. And that means that far from SAPA being limited to a one-off fight in Missouri, we now have a chance to explode the idea of SAPA, of the Second Amendment, but more importantly, as we said now, 10th Amendment and state sovereignty all across the country. And now that's going to happen. So for those who are watching and have some of the timing questions, yes, Judge Wimes has issued his opinion, and that's all it is. It's an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And he is, for those who aren't aware of the federal court process, he is the lowest rung on the federal bench. So you have your district court judge, you have your circuit court judges, then you have your United States Supreme Court way up here on top. Right. And so this is an opinion from the lowest rung on the ladder, and he struck down SAPA law. But I was talking to our lawyers yesterday about this, and they said, well, what's amazing about his opinion is that he never talks about anti-commandeering, which is the heart and soul of the law. He did not find fault with that. He never mentioned it at all. And he never mentioned any of the voluminous Supreme Court precedent. So when this bad boy gets appealed now to the 8th Circuit, we have massive guns to fire in the appellate process, because this guy never mentioned the dual underpinnings of Missouri's SAPA law, the idea of federalism expressed through anti-commandeering and all. I mean, the Supreme Court precedent is not just like anecdotal. The Prins case in 97 specifically says that President Clinton could not force the sheriffs across America to enforce the his gun the Brady bill, the gun control bill.
Yeah.
It's not just like we have a similar theory that we have rulings on. We have specific gun cases. None of that was talked about in this decision. And so I just I think that if you're Merrick Garland and you're Joe Biden, you're sitting there in your little war room. Of course, these are the most effeminate men to ever run, the law enforcement agencies in this country. So war room might be a stretch, but they had a choice to make, and they could have chosen to let Missouri ride and let it go, or they had to choose to be the tyrants that they are and say, we cannot risk the idea of these red states getting the moxie to tell us to go pound sand. At the end of the day, there was no choice. These tyrants are determined. They have to have the manpower of in-state law enforcement, so they had no choice. But in doing so, God, they took the bait, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, when reading through his opinion a little bit, it looks like he was concerned with some of the preamble language more than he was with the actual substance of the bill. And since we're trying to move this bill right now in the Ohio General Assembly, for example, which is in the 6th U.S. Circuit Court District, it's kind of handy that we have this opinion now because we can tweak our language and get it even better. And if this thing is going to the Supreme Court, he just tipped his hand. I remember being in that courtroom and thinking to myself, so this guy's appointed by Obama. Is he going to be a classic liberal, or is he going to be an activist liberal? Because we've had anti-commandeering doctrine rulings before by liberal court justices, Sotomayor, for example. So that was the only question while we sat there. Is this guy gonna put handcuffs on us and give us the win right away from the outset, or is he going to do America a great big fat solid and bump this thing up all the way to circuit court? And that's exactly what he did. It's what we call in the old fishing business is called hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, and
they just had no choice. Tyrants are going to tyrant.
Exactly.
And they had no choice. But again, in doing so, man, they fell for it all the way. So from here, we have spoken already with Attorney General Bailey in Missouri. Doing a show with him actually later on today or first thing Monday. So arrange our schedules right now. And, AG Bailey in Missouri, as well as Governor Parson in Missouri, are 100% wired for sound on this, and I'm looking forward to that. I would dare say that Bailey is salivating over the chance to take this case all the way to the Supreme Court, because I think everyone knows that that's where it's probably going to head, because the Eighth Circuit is definitely more favorable than Judge Wimes is. You have a lot of different judges there, and the complexity of that court and its judicial flavor is definitely right leaning. But you might have other cases, other districts, other circuits rather, where they say, no, we don't like it here in the 9th, or we don't like it here in the 6th. Either way, whether it's this case or a future SAPA law, which is heading up the circuit program, either way, this bad boy is heading to the Supreme Court. And when it gets there, whether it's this year, next year, 3 years from now, whatever, it will be a game changer for gun owners, but it'll be a game changer much, much more so for everybody who cares about freedom, everybody. And this would never have happened with constitutional carry. You're never going to see stand your ground law in the Supreme Court. You're not going to see legislation that we've passed to lifetime carry permits, or letting you have your guns on school property, dropping off your kid. I mean, none of these bills would get there.
Because at the end of the day, federal government, the tyrants in Washington, D.C., always planned to pass gun control at the federal level and then choke it down the states' throats. Yeah. This bill, this idea coming along and getting codified now amongst all of the red states, is preemptively giving the lunatics in D.C. the big bird, as it were, and saying, absolutely not. We're not going to let you do that. Not now, not 15 years from now, not 30 years from now. And as we can see from the last 3 years of the direction of our country, we know they want to accelerate and keep accelerating this decline right over the edge as a country. So that's another reason why this is so powerful.
Yeah, what's neat to watch is, again, you have every pundit now on both the left and the right now weighing in. That again is part of the advantage. You know, in for the last year and a half, it was commies and tyrants in Missouri who were pissed off. You know, media in Missouri who was angry. St. Louis and Kansas City cops or their department heads, that is, who were angry. But this issue is now exploding. And I mean, we fielded calls, I think you and I have, Chris, and or Representative Taylor, who now is on our team, from dozens of lawmakers across America this year, but a whole bunch of them just in the last 48 hours saying, I never knew about this. How can I draft this legislation here in my state? And so when we see NPR already wigging out that, the Dorr Brothers are moving this in states across the country, this is just the beginning. And I would not be surprised to look forward down the road. And, back we began doing gun politics in 2009, late 08, whatever, we had 2 constitutional carry states. And you look up now, we've got 25 constitutional carry states. Well, that was great. But the fight for SAPA and the ramifications here are as high or higher. We might look forward 10 years from now and see 20, 25 SAPA states too. And if we do that, that will, we as in collective gun owners, if we accomplish that together, that will do more to keep America free than anything else I can possibly think of, short of pulling all of our kids out of public schools and giving them an actual dose of truth and justice and righteousness and morality. But from a political standpoint, nothing more I could think of that could accomplish more to protect the integrity of our country than having SAPA be mainstream in red America.
Yep, preach it. I like to think of it in this term. It's kind of like castrating Washington, D.C. when it comes to gun control. They can't do anything if this gets on the books all over the country. Like you said, Aaron, we went from 2 to 26 25 constitutional carry states. I think Florida is going to join them here very shortly. In 2006, it was the first year that Stand Your Ground law passed in the state of Florida. And then all of a sudden, boom, a couple years later, now we have 37, 38 Stand Your Ground law states. Missouri is number 1 on SAPA. I hope that Ohio is number 2, but I want to see 35 different SAPA laws out there on the books. If it does that, if we can accomplish that, we can totally destroy, we can neuter the entire gun control agenda out of Washington, D.C. And that's just on guns. Again, when I think of, like you just said, one of the things that you could best do to preserve freedom is to yank your kids out of government school. I think SAPA can be used on the education system in America by the states. I think it can be used to push back against the medical tyranny that we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. I think it can be used on probably 15 other issues just off the top of my head. And the best way to do that is to pave the way forward on an issue that at least the conservative legislators in most states can understand from a principial, from an obvious perspective. They can see the obvious benefits of doing it. Then they can start thinking themselves, okay, how do we apply this here and here and here? And pretty soon, Washington, D.C. is undone in their agenda for these red states, which they have no plan on coexisting with peacefully. Well, this is the way we fight back.
Well, that's one of the you use the word peacefully. I was talking to an old lifetime member of the Missouri Firearms Coalition a couple weeks ago who did a lot to help bankroll our fight to pass SAPA in 2021. And he said, and I'm going to butcher the number of generations, but he's, is my great grandfather, or whatever it was, who he said the last time Missouri told the feds to go pound sand, he said it involved muskets, and it involved, he said, old 6 guns. And he said, my grandfather was involved in the Civil War. And he said, what SAPA is doing has the same impact. And it's an absolutely peaceful way to simply not comply with the federal Leviathan. And so for everybody out there who's watching this video and you've been enraged in the past, you're watching Joe Biden, and his entire team try to destroy our entire country, and you get angry and angrier at night, just realize SAPA is the relief valve. SAPA is the way. The idea of the 10th Amendment and the states peacefully non-complying is the way that we hold our country together and do it in a very peaceful way. And so, guys, this is the issue of our time as far as I'm concerned. And I think, Chris, it's not just us. As we said, now there's all kinds of people who were talking about this. Was it just yesterday, 2 days ago? Judge Napolitano, probably the leader of the libertarian thought movement when it comes to legislation in particular, came out with an incredible video interview with him and a podcaster, I believe, and we're going to play this at the end of our video here, where he called Missouri's SAPA law the highest or the purest, the most comprehensive expression of federalism since Thomas Jefferson and James Madison opposed the Alien and Sedition Act in 1798. And I gotta tell you,
goosebumps.
Yeah, goosebumps, man. I mean, like, we knew this. We wanted to do this from the get-go, and now to see how this is playing out in real life, thank God for the members of the Missouri Firearms Coalition.
Yes.
Thank God.
America owes a debt of gratitude in states all across the country that are going to pass this eventually. They owe a debt of gratitude to the members of MOFC and Jared Taylor and Eric Burleson and you, obviously, for getting this job done as the first pioneer state. I love to think of it in terms that America is such a pioneer country, obviously. But I love it when great, big, huge things like this come along in very subtle ways. I think everybody shares this frustration. Like, when they see the direction our country is going, and they get angry and they think of their own legislators, do something. Or they think, oh, it's just too late. It's going to be a powder keg. It's going to come to guns, whatever. All of a sudden, SAPA law comes along. This nice pioneer just like waltzes in the door and says, you know what? We can take care of 99% of this stuff. Just put me on the books. Just put me on the books, coach.
Put me in, coach.
Put me in, coach. And that's what we're doing with SAPA. So,
yeah, everyone's playing their part. MOFC members, gosh, so is Judge Wimes. And we thank you for the tyrant that you are and for playing the role that we scripted out in advance. We could not be more happy to see where we are today. Again, want to make sure everyone knows this is no defeat. This is an absolute necessary step in the fight as we elevate the fight for SAPA higher and higher and higher. And someday, hopefully very shortly, this will be in the United States Supreme Court as well. We're going to end here, guys, with this clip from Judge Napolitano from 2 days ago. And you've got to watch this in context. It is amazing. He predicts this matter to go all the way up, to be upheld at each step of the process. And he says, again, this is the highest manifestation of federalism and state sovereignty since Thomas Jefferson. And frankly, it's good enough for me. So, guys, watch this. Share the video online. If you haven't yet got involved in our fight, become a member today of AFA or the state group where you're watching this at, guys, and we'll keep you informed as always.
Judge Napolitano, the host of the Judging Freedom Podcast. Good morning, Judge. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Austin. Pleasure to be with you, no matter what we're talking about.
I think we'll skip the discussion about the Spanish Armada this morning, if you don't mind, Judge.
I agree.
The Missouri had a bill that took quite a number of years to pass. It was called the Second Amendment Preservation Act, and very briefly, what it does, for those who might not know, is that it prevented Missouri police officers from enforcing federal laws and put a $50,000 fine on their department if they cooperated with the feds in enforcing laws that weren't illegal in Missouri. They could cooperate with the feds if it was against Missouri law, but the feds had to enforce their own federal laws here in Missouri. A federal judge overturned that yesterday. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, this is really one of the worst judicial opinions that I've reviewed in the modern era. If this judge were a student of mine at one of the 3 law schools on whose faculties I was privileged to sit and submitted this, he would have flunked, because he missed the most important case, which is a Justice Scalia opinion called Prince versus the United States, in which the federal government tried to get sheriffs to enforce federal gun law. And the sheriff of Phoenix, Arizona, last name Prince at the time, challenged that statute, and the Supreme Court said, you can't do it. The feds can't commandeer, Justice Scalia's phrase, local and state law enforcement to enforce federal law. The feds want to enact a federal law and they want it enforced. Let them go ahead and enforce it. There's absolutely no authority under the Constitution whatsoever for the feds to commandeer locals. So this judge missed the case. Now, the most important case. Now, I didn't read the briefs, and I'm sure that the briefs supported or submitted by the Attorney General of Missouri cited that case. How he could miss it, how he can get around it, I really don't know. The statute itself is one of the finest demonstrations of federalism since Thomas Jefferson and James Madison dissented from the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798 by writing the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which supported the concept of nullification. If a federal statute purports to violate a fundamental liberty expressly guaranteed by the Constitution, and we know that's the case from Justice Scalia's opinion in Heller and Justice Thomas's opinion in Bruin, then the states can nullify that federal statute within their states. So this federal judge has totally missed the boat. As for where this goes, I think the statute will eventually be upheld. Whoever crafted this in the Missouri legislature has a superb understanding of federalism and superb timing, knowing that with this present Supreme Court itching to enhance the concept of federalism, to leave the states to protect civil liberties in areas where the feds failed to do so. Here, the civil liberty to defend yourself. I think the court will profoundly alter this ruling that came down yesterday.